Hello and welcome to Vibrant Living Diaries, the podcast where we unlock the secrets of how you can renew your inner vitality and relearn what it means to live a life with energy and purpose. I'm your host, Danielle Grobman, and I'm proudly collaborating with the International Wellness Alliance. This alliance is home to experts across the world whose specialties allow us to cover the entire spectrum of health and wellness. Just as a disclaimer, the stances our guests take on this podcast and the topics we cover are not representative of our individual perspectives. All information and advice we give here are purely for entertainment purposes. If you're planning on making any lifestyle and/or health changes based on what we cover, please consult with your main medical wellness practitioner to find the next best steps for you to take on your wellness journey. Today's episode, we welcome Daniel Aaron. Despite being agnostic and unfamiliar with the concept of spirituality, Daniel experienced a profound transformation that shattered his preconceived notions of reality. As we'll hear from in a moment, Daniel's divine revelation allowed him to understand the essence of oneness and human potential. Therefore, today's episode will be centered around the concepts of spiritual exploration and personal growth. Daniel's journey has taken him across continents, from Bali to Hawaii, as he's followed his intuition and along the way offers guidance to those seeking deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. He's led retreats, opened a yoga studio, and has helped hundreds of thousands in the process. We now invite you to explore Daniel's remarkable journey and the insights he has gained on his quest for enlightenment. So without further ado, Daniel, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The first time we spoke, you mentioned that the beginning of your whole journey was when you were standing outside on the front porch and you were listening to all the nastiness and the noise going on behind you. I know it's a bit of a dense way to start a conversation, but how do you think that moment shaped your perspective on life in general? Because you mentioned that you didn't really believe in a God and you didn't really have these kinds of spiritual words in your vocabulary. Do you think that part of that was attributed to how you grew up?
Okay, yes, I'm with you. Let's dive deep and I'll give a little context for that. So, the moment you're referring to, yeah, I was about 3 years old and I was outside and my family was doing their nastiness. And across the street, I saw my neighbors and they kind of looked to me, even at 3 years old, like they were just going through the motions. And I had this just clear sense that there must be more to life than this. I mean, I think everybody's childhood in some way informs who they become, especially those profound moments. And yeah, my family, of course, they were doing the best they could. They didn't know how to heal. They didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence. They didn't have understanding for what to do with their problems and their negative feelings. So I grew up around a lot of dysfunction, like plenty of people. And my family that had once been religious, but then had kind of said, I don't think it works. And they just left all that behind. So I grew up without any models of healthy religion. And I didn't know there was something called spirituality. However, that moment always stayed with me. Like, there must be more to life than this. So yeah, later on in my 20s, when I had something of a what you could call a spiritual awakening or a going crazy experience, then I think those seeds were planted sure long ago.
You mentioned that you had a awakening or going crazy moment. When you're in that kind of manic episode, you don't feel crazy. Looking back, do you think it was crazy or do you think it was truly a spiritual awakening?
I don't necessarily think those things are that there are firm lines between them. Part of my experience of that time did feel like I was going crazy at the time, for sure, because part of what was going on is the ways I had learned to see the world, my understandings of how things work were not holding up to what I was experiencing. There's an expression that the quality of one's life is equal to the amount of uncertainty that they can comfortably tolerate. So many of us are afraid of the unknown, afraid of change, and that's part of the human animal part of all of us, that we just cling to try and keep things the same, though on some level the great mystery is just that. It's a mystery. There's always more. There's so much that we can't understand. So for me, that the experience that I had of that, there were times when it was scary. There were times when it was beautiful. There were times when it was confusing. One of the favorite expressions I learned coming out of that experience was, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. when God talks back, it's called mental illness. So who knows? Who knows what's really true? But I guess one of the best conclusions for me, this point in my life and coming through that experience is I don't know. I don't have a lock on what reality is or what's right. I'd rather be in the question than try and have it be answered.
And do you feel like God truly has spoken to you? Because I remember we spoke on this briefly, but you mentioned more of the feeling of feeling like you were lifted off the ground. Did you hear words? Did you have this sense of connection? What was this experience like when you were going through this awakening moment?
Yeah, thank you. I'll give a little more context also. When I had this experience, I went from not believing there was a God or maybe, agnostic, like just in case anything goes wrong, I want to believe there is. I won't say there isn't, right? But that's where I was at. And I was kind of really opposed to religion. Religion didn't make sense to me. So as I had this very intense, what I call awakening experience, one of the things that happened is I went straight from not believing there was God passed through some phase of believing to knowing. And what that knowing was like, there were just a couple moments where it was like I heard the voice of God. More of the time though, it was a kinesthetic corporal kind of feeling, like in my bones, in my gut, in my heart, knowing that there is higher power or something beyond an organizing principle, a great infinite goodness or love. That was just a knowing that I had never even conceived of prior to that, really.
Does it make you feel more or less comfortable having this irrefutable certainty?
That's a great question. Well, part of what came for me through that experience was this real strong feeling that there's no need for fear, that there's no real danger in life in the world. I remember this crystal moment of whatever happens is okay, unless something kills my body, whatever happens, I will learn, I will recover. That's okay. So I came away with a greater comfort, I guess. I think that's what you asked. Is it feel better? Certainly, it feels better knowing that there is a higher loving power. It feels better knowing that we are infinite beings. Does it mean that I never experience discomfort or fear? No, sometimes I do still. I have moments of that come back, and then, it takes me however long it takes me to realize, oh, wait a minute, that's illusion. I don't need that. So, yeah, I mean, it profoundly changed the way I look at the world and certainly feels, I can't even say better because it's like a different world. It's not, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's making me wonder, how have your priorities shifted? Because when you were younger, before you had this awakening, you probably were living your own life, doing your own thing, and then as soon as this happened, you changed course. So how did not only your perspective of life change, but your perspective of what you should do with it?
Well, sure. So prior to that, I was on the kind of the standard American path, which and it's not just American, it's most of the world, but the path that I could describe it as trying to be somebody, get something, feel important, special, unique, significant. That was what I'd seen around me as what to do, and that's why like my parents were very supportive. They would say I could do any job I wanted as long as I was a doctor or a lawyer, and that fit the model because that was the kind of job that was respectable, and earned a lot of money. And I wasn't necessarily following that path exactly. However, there was a part of me that thought I should be. And so when I had this experience, what changed for me was, well, one, I didn't have these words at the time, but the words that came to me later was, I need to learn how to be spirit in human form. And I had no previous education for that. I didn't even allow for the possibility of spirit. So learning how to be healthy, how to live well, how to understand spirituality, how to heal, integrate the past pains and issues that were, below the level of consciousness but affecting me, that became my number one priority. So the first thing that came to me is like, I got to figure this out, right? How to how to heal, how to grow, how to wake up. A little ways into that, then part of what became clear was, how do I share this? How do I help other people with this? I guess one way, and I'll finish this little piece by saying, prior to that experience, my whole orientation was selfish. Like, what can I get? And after that, it became, what can I give? How can I help?
To almost play devil's advocate, I'm asking as an American with an American background, raised on the idea of you need to have certain amount of money, you need to have this material, whether it be a house, a car, etc. How are you able to shift to not what can I get, but what can I give, and still be able to make enough to get by and actually live?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great, a great inquiry, and I think the first thing it points to is, we often have an illusion that things are, it's either this or it's that, and on a deeper level, it's both and. Right. So, of course, we have needs. That's the world we live in. We need enough money to live on and rent. Although, right, there are holy people, or religiously oriented people who have given up all of that and said, I'm going to exist just on what people give me and take care of me. There's traditions in for that in all kinds of different religions. That said, for most of us, that's not the path. It's not just about only a religious or holy life with no thought of gain. We also live in this world, and so sure, we need income. There's a great book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. And one of the principles he puts forward in that is, well, the question, who does better in life according to the standard definitions of success? Well, and our preconception is usually, well, it's the people that are the takers, ones that are, mercenary, and they go out there and they get what they want. Well, that's true and not true. The most successful people are the ones that learn how to give and have that be their orientation, yet also have the ability to receive. Right. And again, it's in lots of different traditions, from business to religious, that the more we give, the more we do receive. That's different if somebody has blockages to receiving, or doesn't feel worthy, or feel like they deserve. Certainly my experience has been in business also. The more I give, the more good that I create for others, the more I serve, then the more comes back to me as well.
And I was just about to ask, how have you implemented this idea of giving and taking in business? And how has that helped you not only grow the business, but help you even more in this path of just understanding who you are, your spirituality, and just becoming a spirit in human form, as you put it?
I needed to break some conditioning that I had around that in the early days of starting to work and serve people in ways that were in alignment with my values. Prior to this experience, I'd had all kinds of jobs, and I'd worked this, and I'd had this business, and I'd had that. But those were all just ways of making money. And after this awakening experience, before long, it became natural to coach and teach people and help them to feel better, to create what they want, to wake up themselves. So the conditioning that I needed to break in the beginning was some of these old ideas that a lot of us grew up with around money, that, right, if something is benefiting others, well, you shouldn't charge for it, right? And if something is spiritual, well, then it should be free, right? And so I had to break certain conditioning I had around that, and realize that not only is it important for me to place a value on my services, right? So that I can be sustainable, right? Because if I'm not earning any money, I don't have this business, and pretty soon I'm working at McDonald's or some such thing. But also, in giving to people, they need to value it for it to be of benefit to them, right? So in the early years of my teaching and coaching, I tried to give as much as I could away for free, because I thought that was the way it was. And what I learned is, most of the time people didn't really value that, right? So I needed to learn that people need to be invested in some way, usually multiple ways, in their own process and in their healing and their recovery and in getting what they want to get. And without that, they don't receive the value. They don't create the value for themselves.
And in your experience when it comes to business, do you find that it's hard for people to put a price on what they're willing to pay in order to achieve this next level of personal development?
Oh, sure. Yeah, all the time. I mean, when people invest in themselves, I think this is true probably for almost everybody on some level. We want this result, but we don't want to pay for it. And so part of what goes on psychologically for all of us is, well, when I can face the fear or the discomfort of making this investment in myself, then I get more, again, more skin in the game, more motivation, and that allows me to create more value for it. And I know, like for me, as someone who's invested, I counted it not long ago, more than $700,000 in my own education, say alternate education, with coaches and teachers and personal and spiritual development. It's been phase after phase where, in the early stages of my growth and development, like paying a few $100s for a workshop or a weekend thing or a week long thing, that was a big deal. That was really scary, and then later spending $1,000 on some kind of event or training. Well, that was really scary. And every time it goes up, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, whatever the investment is, there's a level of scariness in that. And I think that's healthy. That's good. Like when people come to me and they say, "Whoa, that's a big investment to work with you for coaching. That's a lot of money." I say, "Yeah, it's true. Yeah." And it should feel to you like that it strikes your nerves. It should feel a little scary because you're going into the unknown. You're investing in yourself in a way you may never have before. And that's good, right? That fear energy is also excitement, and that can be motivating.
Do you think people have this fear because they're worried that they're not going to make it back, personally speaking? Or is there another element in play?
I think that's true. Yeah, for sure it is that. And then it comes the question of, well, why do they think they're not going to? Right? And that comes down to, well, I don't have faith in you as the coach. That could be, that's it. Sometimes, more often though, most people will say, well, I bought into this program, or I hired this coach, or I did this thing, and it didn't work out. It didn't work. Well, let's go a little bit deeper into that. What happened? And almost always it comes down to, well, I didn't really put in the effort. I didn't really do the work. So what I've found is, more often than not, when people are afraid or nervous about investing in themselves, it's really a fear that I'm not going to do the work, or I'm not going to create the results, fear that they won't follow through, that they can't count on themselves, which really pulls back to, as a coach, for me, one of my biggest jobs is to encourage people to say, "Hey, you're worth it. You have all the talent, the intelligence, the capability to achieve what," and achieve this, meaning whatever their goals are, whatever it is they're looking for, to help them. And just like my coaches do with me, help us all get out of our own way, out of our fears and doubts and worries that hold us back from creating whatever it is we want. Does that make sense?
No, definitely it does. It's an interesting way to think about it. And I want to shift gears a little bit because I do think it's relevant to the story of understanding how you became a coach and how all of this came to pass. You walked into a hospital, you were barefoot. I think you said you were in very loose and baggy clothes and you hadn't showered, so you just looked disheveled. And then you came into this place and they were asking you a lot of psychiatric based questions. How did that experience of other people questioning you influence you when you now approach care and helping people as a coach?
Okay. So, little clarification on what happened. I was in the process of an awakening, a spiritual experience. And as part of that, I was less interested in or connected to some of the normal earthly conventions, right? I was living in the countryside in Massachusetts. I was living in a community home. As this process was underway, I wasn't sleeping a lot. I wasn't eating a lot. So that morning in particular, I had just been out on a walk in the woods and I was barefoot. And a friend of mine convinced me that it would be a good idea to go to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. And I wasn't really interested in it, didn't feel like I needed it. However, for my friend, it was something that would help him to feel better. He was concerned about me because he saw I was behaving differently than I had been before. So I said, "Okay, sure, let's go, do it." And I wasn't thinking normal world stuff. Here I am in the countryside in the midst of this experience. And so yeah, I got in the car with him and I had sweat shorts on and a t-shirt and no shoes, and we went to the hospital, and I got there and I was like, "Oh, right, this is now I'm in a different world. We ain't in Kansas anymore." Right? And people are very much in a mainstream world there, and you don't walk into a hospital without shoes on. That's abnormal behavior. One of the things I think of now, another quotation I heard coming out of that experience, Krishnamurti said, I'll paraphrase a little bit, but he said, to be well adjusted to an insane society is not a sign of sanity. So yeah, I had the experience of going in for a psychiatric evaluation and realizing that part of what was going on is that the people in my midst there, they didn't understand what was going on inside me either. And I say either because in the midst of this spiritual awakening, I didn't fully know what was going on. I didn't have context for spirituality or for spontaneous awakening or kundalini awakening. I had never heard of any of those things at that point. Yet later on, I was able to realize, oh, that's what was going on. Really clear textbook. So I guess this is the last thing I'll say, and we'll see if I came anywhere near responding to your question. One of the things that I realized through that experience, something I had learned in philosophy school earlier, I'd learned in my head, but then I got into my heart and my body, which is I don't know, right? Basho has a great poem that says, everybody seems so certain. I walk as if on thin ice. So for me in my work now, whenever I meet a client or work with somebody, I always approach it as I don't know. And so I ask a lot of questions. Everybody's unique. Every moment is unique. And so I think that's one of the things that came out of that experience was a heightened level of curiosity and less assumption that I know what's going on or what should be going on.
I wonder, was there any kind of defining moment or something that someone said to you or something that someone did with you that made you approach your business in a certain way? Or was it solely just after you had this awakening and you were like, I have to do something with all of this?
Couple things come to mind immediately. One is coming out of that experience. There was a level to it that was traumatic for me, right? There was a lot of confusion, and then getting kind of a negative or difficult encounter with the Western medical health system was certainly challenging, because so much of that model is you're broken, you're wrong, you need to be medicated, and I'm super lucky that I didn't sort of fall for that. And I'm not saying that that's inappropriate or wrong. For some people, sometimes that might be the best course of action. However, for me, I had an innate, deep knowing that there was nothing wrong with me and I didn't need to be or want to be medicated, that what I needed was to understand, right? And so I had this strong underlying feeling through the entire experience, and then especially afterwards, which was, wow, there's a lot for me to learn, right? Nobody taught me this. I didn't know anything about this before. I need to learn how to live in the world in a way I never had before. So that would became a really strong driver for me coming out of that. I got obsessed with personal and spiritual development, and that has stood me very well because one, it helped me, but two, it's provided an incredible foundation. My own curiosity about what does it take to live well, or in my terms, vibrantly alive, has helped me to serve people over the years. And then one other thing I'll say, right, there were some landmark paragonal quotations or moments that came through that whole experience. One of them was after my sort of the pinnacle of the experience, I had the opportunity for various kinds of therapy. And I was like, I'll do it all. Sure, anything, whatever. I started working with a shamanic counselor. I started doing yoga. And I also had a traditional sort of Western therapy approach going too. And I went to this group therapy there. And I was like, I want to experience and learn it all. And the guy who facilitated the group therapy said something which in the moment didn't strike me as off, though upon reflection, I was like, whoa. And the statement was, our job is to make you normally unhappy like the rest of us. Our job is to make you normally unhappy like the rest of us. And his perspective was that he was dealing with a lot of people that maybe were struggling with reality in some way according to normal definition of reality, right? They were on the fringe of society in some way, perhaps, people that had substance abuse issues or behaviors that were not fitting with normal society. So from his perspective, he wanted to normalize people so that they could fit in and so they could be functional. So I get that his heart was in the right place. He was a good guy. However, upon a little reflection and from the help of a good friend who, when I said that to them, they were like, whoa, Daniel, be careful of these people. I realized later, like, whoa, yes, that is a lot of the Western psychological model is if people are too high or too low, well, let's medicate them so they can be numb and in the middle somehow. So the idea of being normally unhappy to me is just anathema to what we're here for. Going back to when I was 3 years old, that's what I saw around me. People were normally, and normal meaning this is what was conventional, this is what was common. People were unhappy, they were going through the motions. Maybe they weren't like severely depressed, or maybe they were, but they were not radiantly alive and joyous and full of life and enthusiasm. And I came through that experience with this deep knowing that that's what we're here for. And that's what's possible, to be vibrantly alive, to be thrilled with life. So that's what came to me. I hope something in there was helpful.
Yeah. It begs the idea of there's so much controversy when it comes to Western medicine because there are some people that when they hear that they have a certain diagnosis, they're 100% on board. Okay, give me my medication. I need to be on this immediately. I don't want to be a disruption to anyone. I don't want to be abnormal. I want to be normal. And then you have the opposite side that says, well, why do I need to take this medication? Is it really necessary? And they're a bit more skeptical and they reject it. From your perspective in all of this, or your perception of all of this, why do you think Western medicine doesn't want us to be happy or in this radiant, vibrant state? I understand why they wouldn't want us to be too low, but what harm do you think it causes to be too happy, to be too uplifted?
Well, that's a deep and powerful question. To respond to that fairly, we need to step back a little bit and look at what's the history of psychiatry and therapy and psychology. Is, for the longest time, it's all been about going from dysfunction to function. And we still have this big book called the DSM. I don't know what number it's on now, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. It's basically a huge recipe book for all the things that can go wrong, all the diseases, labels, problems that humans can have. And for somebody who's in a high level of dysfunction, whatever we call that, going from there to functional is a really good move, right? That's helpful. And that's been the orientation of psychology for ages. And it's only in the last 30 years that we have this new branch of psychology called positive psychology, which says, okay, what about if you're functional? How do you go from functional to extraordinary? And this is a really brand new thing for the world. So I don't know that it's true that there is an inherent let's not let people be happy or be extraordinary, that there's a fear about that. I think it's just that so much of the mental health model has been on dysfunction to function. And yeah, and we've seen people in the midst of extreme highs or manic episodes do stuff that's dangerous or scary. So there's an understandable fear to that, and people are overworked and they're busy, and so hard to understand all of what's going on. You can't There's a therapeutic adage, you can't take people deeper than you've been yourself. So unless somebody has had a quote spiritual awakening, they're not necessarily going to understand what that is, and it might just look like somebody's manic or too high in some way.
Yeah, and I can understand how, as that person, it can be quite frustrating because if you are genuinely experiencing a bout of schizophrenia, for example, and you're in this manic episode and you are schizophrenic, but you yourself don't feel like you're schizophrenic, they could probably relate to what you said before when you said, I know that I'm well and I don't need to be medicated. And they may be saying, well, I know I'm well and I don't need to be medicated. So there's this kind of pull of like, how do you know which is which? And how can you create that line?
For sure. And one of the things I realized coming out of my experience, having a quote spiritual awakening, which also from a Western medical looks like a psychotic break, right? It can very much look like that. One experience in the US. If I had been in India when that happened, it would be a whole different experience, right? And it's a different experience in the US if you're in a lower income class than if you're in an upper income class, right? So in the world, we treat the same thing very differently depending on circumstantial differences too.
But what do you make with all of this? You said that if someone hasn't had that spiritual awakening themselves, then they can't really understand. It looks like something and they can only use their own point of reference. Either in your business or in your personal life, how can you bring these concepts to everyday people who maybe haven't experienced it but want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest awakenings that came from that period is one, that we're never alone, that there is this higher power, love, unconditional love, and that we all have a unique power and purpose, right? So my work since then has revolved around how do I help people to awaken to the truth of who they are, to their true potential, to being their unique version of spirit, to being fully alive, to succeeding in the ways they want to. That's been the mission all along, and I keep growing and hopefully getting more effective in my ability to help people with that. A lot of the times it's about sweeping away the things that are in the way, the negative thoughts we have, our fears, the worries, the doubts that hold us back. Sometimes it's about empowering people to take the actions toward what they want in their lives, which for whatever reasons, there's a lot of them, we have tended to hold back from. For me, the experience was I tasted this potential for what humanity can be, for what we can live, and I didn't know how to live that consistently at that point. So that became my obsessive education. And so my work now is all about helping people to just awaken to more of who they are, to realize more of their glory, their power, to create what they want in their lives.
I remember last we spoke, you mentioned that you had a book as well. Does your book touch on any of those topics?
Yeah. So, yeah, the book is called The Art of Spiritual Leadership: 40 Laws to Transform Your Life and the World. And even like good little story, the cover here, my daughter, who was 13 at the time, ended up drawing that picture because I wasn't happy with the first designs that came back. I was like, oh, that's not really doing it. And then, so it forced me to think a little deeper about what's the central metaphor of the book. And it's like this idea that we are all a hot air balloon. Our natural tendency is to rise up, and yet we have these sandbags that hold us down: fears, doubts, conditioning, pains, things we haven't healed from. And so as we learn how to cut those sandbags to release the beliefs that hold us back, then our natural tendency is to rise. So yeah, that's what the book is all about. It's mostly stories. It's about, some stories of people that you would know, some that you don't know, some of my own stories. of how all of us can awaken to our true potential and create what we want.
If there's one lasting bit of advice or a takeaway lesson that you've learned throughout your entire experience of life that you could leave the audience with, how would you end this session with?
These words: anything is possible. And so part of what that means to me is whatever we have been tolerating, right? For y'all in the audience, whatever you're tolerating, whenever the words come or the thoughts come, well, that's just the way it is, right? That implies some kind of, well, I'm just resigned to that. I don't really like it. I don't really want that. Then let that be like a spark of alert. And it's possible for you to then say, no, it's not just the way it is. I can change it. Because the truth is, you are infinitely powerful and you literally can create anything you want. So the things that are less than optimal, that are a bummer, they can be addressed. You have such infinite power. I encourage you to set your sights high and take a step, whatever that step is today, whether that's getting a coach or reading a book or listening to a podcast like this. Know that you're capable of anything and you deserve to live a life that is glorious and amazing.
Thank you. That's a very positive way to end the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for such great questions. Thanks for doing the work that you're doing to be helping people in this way. That's fantastic.
That wraps up today's episode of Vibrant Living Diaries. A huge thanks to our guest for sharing your expertise and to the International Wellness Alliance for making this all possible. As always, we're eager to hear your thoughts and experiences. Connect with us on our social media platforms and share how you're integrating the knowledge you've gained here into your daily life. I'm Danielle Grobman and can't wait to continue this journey with you in our next episode. But until then, keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the vibrant life you deserve.